And so if you watch this interview, you start to see how someone could go through the rabbit hole and see this interview and see everything upside down.
Let's see the first clip.
You wouldn't have an electric car mandate, which is one of the great jokes of all time. And I think everybody should have an electric car if they want one, but they should be able to buy other forms of propulsion.
Yes.
Okay. Just want to point out, as I do on a weekly basis, Trump can't go through a week without committing a phonemic paraphasia, okay, which is a hard, concrete, reliable sign of organic brain damage. Just saying, I just want to keep pointing it out so we don't forget it. It's not a joke. It's not something for, Comedy Central. It's a serious sign of organic decline. That's all I wanted to say.
Propulsion is not a word. He substituted.
Propulsion is not a word, right? Yeah. Do not try to use that in Scrabble. You will not succeed. All right. Well, the other thing I want to say before we start the second clip is one of the things that we talked about in our last show, Harry, where we looked at his angry press conference, as you call it, is how his paranoia animates his flock, right? He creates these paranoid scenarios that are not true. And then basically says, I'm the one who will protect you from this invading horde of immigrants or these other outrages. Well, here we have two examples of his creating a false threat. And actually, Harry, I think you mentioned one of our viewers wrote to us and said, well, actually, he doesn't make these things out of whole cloth. There are articles examples where a lot of things where it happened once to one person and it was written about, and then he goes and generalizes it and says, this is a general trend in society. And the people who hear it believe him. So let's hear a couple of the existential crises that are facing America today.
And so many other things. I mean, like you go into New York, the kids can't have Little League games anymore. It sounds so trivial, right?
Why?
Because the migrants are living on the fields. They have all tents, unless you want to play around the tents. It's a little bit tough. It's a little bit tough to play. But no, I mean, but when you think of like common sense, who really thinks that men should be playing in women's sports, right? It's something I mention all the time, gets one of the biggest applause, but who, where does the mind come from?
Right.
A man playing, look at the weightlifting records. I mean, these weightlifting guys that never lifted anything before, they're breaking the records by numbers that are like unthinkable against women that are the top women, they're the strongest, they're getting blown away. Who would think? The swimming records, the track records, it's crazy. It's just crazy. I actually, when I first heard about it, what was it, like 6, 7, 8 years ago, right? When I first heard about it, I actually thought they were kidding. I thought, this was just a funny joke. But they're actually serious about it. They're actually committed to it.
Okay, so, just very briefly, the person who wrote into me pointed out that there was an article that on Randall's Island, which is an island off of Manhattan, where there are sports fields. In fact, in my high school when I was growing up, we used to go to Randall's Island, that there were some migrants camping there. So Trump hears this one thing and then says he can't play Little League anywhere anymore because the hordes of people are taking over the fields. Last week, we also mentioned that he said that there was someone with a machete in a McDonald's. It turns out there was someone with a machete outside of McDonald's. So Trump reads this one little clip, and now suddenly it's an invasion of criminals who are going to chop you to pieces with your machete. This is how it works. Remember, he doesn't read very much. He's not disciplined, and he's also suffering cognitive decline. So now if he reads a bit, he can just take that and explode it into an invasion. And the same thing is true with trans people in athletics. How many is it, John? Like 11 people?
It's a minute amount. It's a minute amount. And I just want to tell an anecdote about that I was in a social situation and someone who we know was a Trump supporter was actually warned in advance, please don't talk about politics. But she couldn't help herself. And she said, I just feel so sorry for the girls. What do you mean? The high school athletes, they're all giving up. All the female athletes are just giving up because they can't compete against the trans athletes. I just don't think that's fair. They're giving up. It's like, and we were trying to convince her it wasn't true. And finally I said, can I just Google it? And I go like you said, there's something like, a dozen trans athletes in high school sports right now, maybe 20, but it's certainly, and I did find, again, Harry, one example of a girl swimmer who complained and quit the team, whatever, she didn't like it. But it's not that the women are just giving up en masse. They're all just giving up. But she believed it. You understand? And so the point is that when you feel like your society and your values are under that kind of threat, okay, it justifies even picking this sort of, gross strong man if he's going to protect the country and the values.
And bring Little League back to their fields where they belong.
Yeah, make Little League great again. And also, by the way, see the way they engage with him. He says, "Well, if you want to play around the tents," and they'll go, ha, ha, ha.
Well, listen, people have said about Trump, if you hang out with him, he's charming. He tells stories. He tells jokes. It's all about him. And we're watching what that's like. It's very effective. It's just everything he says, almost everything he says isn't true.
It's almost like, but the way they react to it, it makes it feel like it is true. One of the things that we are worried about and should be worried about, this could be one of the negative effects of the conviction, that if he were ever to gain power again, he's going to be 1,000 times more vindictive and extreme in his revenge. I mean, he's clearly saying he's going to take revenge, but you have to understand from the point of view of the psychology of a malignant narcissist, right? Remember that moment when at the press dinner, when Obama was president and he made fun of Trump? Do you remember that moment? And Trump just looks at it with this look of like hate and daggers like coming from his eye. And he claims that was the moment he made the final decision to run for president because he'd been insulted, he'd been humiliated, and his reaction is then to fight back. And so he's been insulted and humiliated. He's a wounded animal. And so what you need to understand is if he were to ever gain power again, the negative reaction that we would be feeling on the other end is the ferocity of his rage. So here, the Fox commentator tries to give him a chance to look presidential and gracious. She tries to ask him, well, are you going to take revenge or are you going to be a president? But you've said your best revenge would be being a president of all the people. He doesn't take the opportunity to be gracious. Let's hear it.
Mr. President, you've been through a lot.
Yeah.
In your presidency, what they've done to you, you've got the verdict that just came through. A lot of Democrats have expressed concern that if you're elected, you're going to want revenge. And some of your supporters have said, well, mutually, we're just talking about the weaponization of the justice system against political opponents. Some of your supporters have said, well, the only way to stop this is mutually assured destruction, right? If you do it to us, we're going to do it to you. You've said, no, my revenge is going to be success for America. You've just had this verdict.
Yeah.
Do you still feel the same? What's your thoughts on that?
It's a really tough question in one way because these are bad people. These people are sick. And they do things that are so destructive. I mean, look what they did from the day I got there. And I don't know, a lot of people said we have no choice but to elect Trump. Republicans, because he's the only one that can withstand this. Don't forget, if it weren't me, they'd be going after somebody else. And I know a lot of the competition, they wouldn't do so well. They wouldn't be doing so well right now. They'd be saying, Mommy, take me home. I want to go home. This is brutal. But these are sick people.
So, of course, now he's the victim. These are sick people. And in answer, are you going to take revenge? Well, we'll have to see because these are sick people. These are bad. I mean, yes, we're going to get them.
And the other people are weak and will have to go home to their mommies.
Right.
And after we learned from Justin 2 weeks ago that Trump's mother was so cold and so unavailable, that's a sign of weakness to want that kind of maternal comfort.
And he always has to be dominant in every story. And so, first of all, he's made himself the victim. Well, no, most people couldn't withstand this, but they'd be running home to mommy because they're not strong like me. So now he's this strong figure. But also, look how she sets him up. Look how the president, you've been through so much.
Yeah, so much sympathy.
That's you've been through so much. Yeah, yes, he's also done so much.
Let me just remind our audience. He told lies about the conviction. They asked him not one question about the charges, not one question about the substance. They accepted his story that it's all made up. He did nothing wrong. It's just business records. That's what he said. It's a part of a ledger, and they just went with it. They just accepted his reality. Yeah. So of course he's a big worried about him.
There's one place where he does try to explain the charges, and see if you can follow this. See if you can follow this. It's a little bit of a challenge. So see this tape.
For instance, the 51 intelligence agents. Who thinks of these? And they think about it just like they say, "I'm guilty of." And all this information was from so many years before the election. It's before the election, so it wasn't like, oh, gee, I won an election. The election just started coming out during the trial. They said, oh, I have an idea. Remember John Lovett's The Liar? Mm-hmm. Yeah. I went to Harvard. Yeah. I went. They do that during the trial. Yeah. That's right. It affected the election. This stuff never even came. I never even heard about affecting the election. They're talking about the election of 2016. They're going back.
Masterful.
It's so confusing. It doesn't matter. You're gonna get lost in that maze. And then what are you left with? We've been talking about, I forget who said this, but you quoted it, that Trump is sort of doing stand-up all the time. So after all this meandering and even the election, what's his summary of the trial? It's like John Lovett's. They just said, it has something to do with the election.
They just stood up and lied, right?
You stood up and told a casual Lovett's like there's no preparation, there's no logic, there's no evidence, there's no witnesses, there's no facts, there's no emails. It's just they just kind of got up there and said, yeah, that's the ticket. You inferior the election. And you know what? I think you kind of leave that with that's kind of what they did.
Yeah. No, if you don't think about it too hard. As long as you don't think about it. By the way, it was Bill Maher who said that Donald Trump is doing shtick on stage, that he's like a stand-up. And he's right.
Yeah. So, again, I want to, we're going to do another anti-immigration insane piece. But I just want to keep pointing out, as we did in the last show, this thing about immigrants is serious. That, I've said that Trump is the American Hitler. Some people have pushed back. But I think in this scenario, the immigrants are the new Jews. And I don't believe that he'll build death camps, but I do believe that he'll build concentration camps. And people need to understand concentration camps are when you concentrate an undesirable population in a camp. And he built camps for 250,000 immigrants before the child separation policy came in. So just to let you know, these comments about immigrants are going to have real consequences for real people if he ever gets into power. So let's see his explanation for why crime has dropped in Venezuela.
And Venezuela just reported to 72% that their crime is down 72% in a year. You know why? Because they moved all their criminals into the United States. And the next time we do an interview, we'll do it in Venezuela because it'll be much safer than being in our.
Again, charming, people laughing, right? What a ridiculous idea. What a completely idiotic idea that because they've imported all their criminals here en masse, like by the hundreds of thousands, okay, their crime rate has dropped by 80%. And again, the people at the Fox are going, oh yeah, They're agreeing with that reality.
Yeah. The percentage Trump uses, he's used this line many times before. It's always a different number, right? It always is. It's not. It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter, right? The other thing. So talking about how they turn things around in immigration. Remember Trump's child separation policy? How we lost all these children. We separated thousands and thousands of children from their families, and then we couldn't find the families again to put the kids back.
Including babies from their mothers. Mm-hmm. Babies, infants. It wasn't just
out of their mother's arms.
Teenagers or 8-year-olds. It was small babies and really hundreds and hundreds of them.
No, actually, Harry, so you don't realize this. That was a Biden program. You didn't know that. That wasn't a Trump program. That was a Biden program.
Oh,
you'll see.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, let's let the real newscasters fill us in. Can we see the next clip?
So in just this fiscal year 2024, there's been 74,000 unaccompanied children that have come across the border. In 2023, get this number, 137,275. You've seen the images of these children, 5, 7 years old, 9 years old, 12 years old. And The Joe Biden administration has lost 80,000 of them. No one can track, no one knows where they're at.
At least, yeah, much more.
At least, there's probably more, but at least. Will the Trump administration commit to finding these children, to finding them and returning them to their families, to their countries, because many of them have been lost into sex trafficking.
Many of them are dead.
It's heartbreaking.
No, it's heartbreaking. It's amazing.
Will you commit to that? Will you commit to finding those children in their
I haven't been asked that question, but the answer is yes. It's a simple answer. Many of them are dead. They have done such a bad job. They have done such a bad job. And they go under the guise that they're doing this wonderful job of letting people come in. You know what's also really bad? The caravans. I think I came up with that name a long time, but where you form 25, 30, 40,000 people coming up, the level of abuse and just anger and craziness toward women. Yeah. I mean, the caravans, the mothers put their daughters in those caravans, knowing in many cases the daughter's not coming back, knowing for almost certainty that the daughter's going to be raped.
Yes.
They give them large, bottles of birth control pills, the mothers, because they know they're going to be raped on the way up all the time.
It's unconscionable.
No, the whole thing is incredible. And Biden thinks he's doing a favor by allowing. And the only reason they have the caravans is because I ended it all. People weren't getting in.
Oh, my God. I don't even know how to start to comment on something like this. The caravans were 20 to 30, 40,000 people. Do you remember it was a made-up thing where they found a truck on its way through Mexico?
Well, he claims that I made up the word caravan, by the way. He claims credit for that.
He did. It was a made-up thing they did before the first midterm election.
Right.
And it
Another
was
fake invasion.
He always had an invasion coming in before an election or an off year. And then this story that really has all these mothers putting their girls on these caravans, and because they're going to be sex trafficked and raped, and they have birth control pills. So it turns these immigrants into monsters.
Exactly.
That's really the point. It turns them into monsters. And let's remember that the reality is that there were a lot of parents sending children across the border, because if they did under the Biden policy, they would be granted asylum. It was a real problem for Biden because these were people claiming asylum from other countries, and there was a loophole in how the thing was worked out. That's very different from taking babies and children away from their families and losing them. I mean, this created outrage in I guess it was 2018. Among Republicans were outraged that this was happening. Yeah. And now it's all been turned into something else.
And so this is why when you go to a party, and you meet a Trump supporter and you say, you want to talk about what they've done wrong. And again, I had this concrete experience on this issue saying, well, okay, look, let's forget about politics. Let's talk about you're a mother. What about childhood separation? I mean, wasn't that how could you? Oh, well, that's nothing compared to the childhood separation Biden's doing. In other words, this stuff is working. And by the way, I just have to make fun of this interviewer because he's making it this crazy claims, right? That they're putting them in caravans to be raped. They'll never see him again. Just giving them birth control. First of all, by the way, you see it making them sound like monsters, right? That they don't care about their own children, right? That they're so heartless towards their own children. It makes them seem subhuman as opposed to seeing them as human figures who are struggling, right, to survive and to better themselves and to escape, then you would sympathize with them, right? But no, they're these callous, kind of people who don't even care about their own children. And while he's saying this, she goes, I know. It's like, you don't know. Just shut up. But you're validating craziness. You're validating horrible lies about immigrants that are making people feel they're invaded.
She's believing everything he says. This is Earth 2. This is a different universe where he's never challenged, where everything he says is true.
I know.
And they just love being in his presence. And folks, you should know this. Fox only released an 11-minute segment and a 7-minute segment on Fox and Friends Saturday. and then a couple of other very short clips. John was able to find a guy on the internet who had the entire hour and a half interview, which if you sit through it is really troubling because he's charming, but he's meandering and he's lying all the time. And it was someone at Fox News squirreled that tape to somebody. Someone was being subversive because that was not released officially by Fox.
Oh,
they only wanted to show you. And in fact, the 11 minutes are edited. Someone sent me a link. Grateful to all of you, by the way. I think we're having a whole group of psychology interns now who are helping us. But someone actually sent me a version of the 11 minutes, which annotates the cuts because they're chopping it up and making him look more organized than he is.
So this last tape doesn't really relate to psychology per se, but it's one of the things that most disturbs me about Trump and about Trumpism is the total collapse of patriotism, the total surrender of our country to Russia without, even firing a shot, without any resistance. To me, that's almost the worst thing you could do as a leader, is to betray your country to a foreign enemy. And he's been so open about it for 8 years. I just want to play this one little clip about Ukraine. And you tell me who's aiding, abetting, and giving comfort to the enemy.
I've said often, we wouldn't be in this situation if I were president. But we are now in this situation. Yeah. If you were president again, how do you deal with Ukraine? How do you deal with Putin?
I think I deal very well with him. We're in a much weaker position because he's winning. I mean, look, we can be nice. I asked Orban, I said, who's winning? If you watch the fake news, you think, well, even they aren't saying it now because the spring offensive never happened. The spring offensive was the opposite, okay? But I said, who's winning? He said, they are. He said, they're a warring nation. They've fought Napoleon. They fought Hitler. Ukraine is a very small country by comparison with far fewer people. They're running out of soldiers, And I would get together. I get along very well with Zelensky because don't forget, he was very honorable with impeachment hoax number one. Hoax. They're all hoaxes. Everything they do is a hoax.
Remember in World War II, Tokyo Rose? She was this Japanese person who just broadcast to the troops, "You're losing, give up, you're losing." He just seems like the Tokyo Rose, of the Ukraine war.
But notice that Viktor Orban told them that they're losing.
Yes, thank you.
Orban, a dictator who's allied with Putin. I mean, what a joke! What a joke!
And what a tell!
And also one reason why Ukraine has been having problems lately is because the Republicans, ordered by Trump, have held up funding to Ukraine for 6 to 8 months when they needed those weapons. However, NATO has been stepping up. France is stepping up. We're now finally, Mike Johnson did something kind of fascinating. He got around Trump and the MAGA crowd and got funding to Ukraine. And they're actually doing rather well. There's no way that they're losing. They're not. It's a horrible thing. And Russia is trying to wear them down. But here's this guy selling them out.
Selling them out. And again, you don't have to be a member of the intelligence community, for him to say, well, I asked Putin's friend who was winning. And he said, Putin is winning. So he's,
everyone knows it. Everyone knows it.
Everyone knows it.
We're all talking about it.
We're all talking about it. So I mean, it's just so blatant. So on the surface, I mean, how much more blatant does it need to be? Well, we have just a couple more clips. I just want to give you the sense of the hero's send-off they gave him at the end of this interview one day after his conviction. So let's see the next piece of tape.
I want to ask you what Rena in Liberty, Maine asks. By the way, your sleep schedule, your diet, these are things of legend. So she asks, President Trump, what is the very first thing you do every morning?
So I don't sleep a lot. I don't say that as a badge of courage. A lot of people, I don't sleep, and they maybe do. I rarely eat breakfast. It's funny, I love food, but I don't necessarily, I'm too anxious. I really enjoy life. It's crazy. I shouldn't enjoy life. I get indicted, I get impeached. Somebody said, how do you live? You know the most often question? I get two questions. Number one, I get, will they do it again? You know what that means. Very ominous. I said, they're going to try because they can't help themselves. They're bad. But we hope we're going to have them blocked, okay? The other question is, how do you do it? How do you stand up and you get impeached, you get indicted, you get this, you get convicted of bullshit. And they say, how do you do it?
How do you do it? How does he do it?
It's just amazing. By the way, did you notice they asked him, what do you do in the morning? He didn't really answer. He said, I don't eat breakfast. He then said, I get anxious.
That was
and then he said, but I enjoy life and everything's fine. But he said the word anxious. He didn't have to say he was anxious.
Now, that was a little bit of a slip. But I love the way they start the question. Well, you're a thing of legend. Let's start there. It's just ridiculous. Okay. Well, it gets worse. It gets worse, folks. Let's see the next clip.
And I know that you've said before that you've been sustained by the prayers of lots of Americans. I've seen pictures of people praying over you.
It's incredible, actually.
Her question is, she says, you've been faced with so much adversity and persecution for years. What's your relationship with God like, and how do you pray? That's Sharon from Alabama.
Okay, so I think it's good. I do very well with the evangelicals. I love the evangelicals. And I have more people saying they pray for me. I can't even believe it. And they are so committed, and they're so believing. They say, sir, you're going to be okay. I pray for you every night. I mean, everybody, almost, I can't say everybody, but almost everybody that sees me, they say it. It's such a beautiful thing. You know what's a beautiful thing, too? When you look at all of this bad stuff going on, they have nothing to look up to. They have no God. They have no anything. They kill people. They beat people. They push people into subways. There's just nothing there. Religion is such a great thing. It keeps you, there's something to be good about. You want to be good. It's so important. And I don't know if it's explained right. I don't know if I'm explaining it right now. But when you have something like that, you want to be good. You want to go to heaven, okay? You want to go to heaven. If you don't have heaven, you almost say, what's the reason? Yeah. Why do I have to be good? Let's not be good. What difference does it make, right? Or they try to create heaven here.
There's so much there.
What is your relationship with God? It's good, and because people pray for me all the time. The evangelicals love me. He didn't answer the question.
Right.
Doesn't know how to answer the question.
Because he doesn't have a relationship with God. He has no relationship with God, none.
No, of course not. And also, it was a very revealing kind of little riff he went on about why would you be good if you didn't want to get into heaven?
Right, exactly.
This is a guy who cheated on his wife when she was pregnant. Not only with a porn star, but with also a year-long affair with a Playboy playmate who hung out with Jeffrey Epstein.
And actually, he's just diagnosed himself as a psychopath.